Know your place. HR didn't raise her voice when she said it. That was the worst part. Calm. Measured. Like she'd practiced it in the mirror before calling me in. I remember staring at the framed, "Integrity First" poster behind her, wondering if irony was part of the company culture or just an accident. You've overstepped, she continued, folding her hands like this was a performance review instead of a warning. Reaching out to executive leadership directly creates confusion. Confusion. That's what she called the email I sent at 8:12 a.m., the one with 6 attachments, 3 months of audit logs, and a summary that could cost the company millions if ignored. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded once. Because arguing would have meant explaining something she had already decided not to understand. Good, she said, relieved. We encourage initiative, within boundaries. Boundaries. I stood, thanked her, and walked out. What she didn't know, what no one in that office knew, was that 36 minutes earlier, someone had already read my email. And he wasn't confused. He was moving. At 8:12 a.m., I broke an unwritten rule. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Carefully. For 3 weeks, I had been tracking inconsistencies buried inside the language account, the company's most valuable client. The numbers looked clean on the surface. Too clean. Every discrepancy was small enough to ignore. Together, they told a different story. I flagged it internally first. No response. I escalated to my manager. He told me, focus on what you're paid to do. So I did something no one at my level was supposed to do. I sent the email. No accusations. No panic. Just evidence, organized, labeled, impossible to misread. Subject line, irregularities, requires executive review. I didn't expect a reply. I expected silence. Maybe a warning. Maybe exactly what HR gave me. What I didn't expect was how fast it landed. For minutes after I hit send, it was opened. Not by an assistant. Not by a filter. Directly. And by the time HR told me to know my place, the one person who actually decided that place had already seen everything. There are rules in corporate life no one writes down, but everyone follows. Don't make your manager look unprepared. Don't question revenue tied to leadership bonuses. And never, under any circumstance, skip levels. I broke all 3 before 9 a.m. By the time I got back to my desk from HR, the floor felt different. Not louder. Quieter. Conversations dropped when I walked past. My manager kept his eyes glued to his screen, jaw tight, like he was waiting for something he couldn't stop. That's when it hit me. The email hadn't disappeared. It had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. I logged in, hands steady, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. At 9:18 a.m., the elevators opened. No announcement. No warning. Just a subtle shift, people straightening in their chairs, screens minimized too quickly, a silence that spread in seconds. I looked up slowly. You don't feel power enter a room. You feel the reaction to it. And whatever had just stepped off that elevator wasn't here for routine business. I saw the reaction before I saw him. 2 senior managers stood up at the same time, too fast. Someone knocked over a coffee cup and didn't even react. Conversations died mid-sentence like someone had pulled the plug on sound. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Certain. I looked up. And there he was. The CEO. Not on a screen. Not framed in a quarterly update. Standing on our floor like he had every right to be there, like the building itself had adjusted to him. Behind him were two people I recognized instantly, legal and compliance. My manager went pale. Actually pale. The CEO's gaze swept the room once, sharp and efficient, before it stopped. On me. Not near me. On me. Hi, he said, like we were meeting somewhere normal. Can we talk? My heartbeat didn't spike. It settled. Because in that moment, something became painfully clear. HR had just told me to know my place. And the man who defined that place had walked in, and come straight to me. Walk with me. He didn't wait for an answer. I stood, aware of every eye following us as we crossed the floor toward the glass conference room, the one my manager used for meetings that never actually resolved anything. The CEO opened the door himself and stepped aside. No assistance. No small talk. Just me, him, and the file I had sent. He placed a printed copy on the table. It wasn't skimmed. It was marked, notes in the margins, sections underlined, questions written in tight, precise handwriting. I read your email, he said. Not, we received it. Not, it was flagged. I read it. He tapped one section. If this holds, it's not an error. It's controlled. I nodded. It holds. A brief silence. Then, who else has seen this? My manager, I said. And HR. He didn't react outwardly. But something shifted, subtle, sharp. HR, he repeated. I almost smiled. 30 minutes ago, I was being told to stay in my lane. Now I was sitting across from the only person in the company who could erase lanes entirely. And he was already doing it. The first call he made wasn't dramatic. No raised voice. No confrontation. Just a quiet, precise instruction delivered into his phone as he stepped aside for less than a minute. That was all it took. When he came back, he didn't explain what he'd done. He didn't need to. You could feel it happening. Like pressure shifting inside walls you didn't realize were already cracking. Stay available, he said, closing the file. And don't discuss this with anyone. I nodded. When we walked back onto the floor, the energy had changed completely. My manager's desk was empty. Not out for coffee, empty. Gone. His screen was locked. His chair pushed in too neatly. 10 minutes later, access to the language account was restricted company-wide. People started whispering. Then pretending they weren't. At 10:02 a.m., my inbox lit up. A calendar invite. From the CEO. Subject line, follow-up, confidential. No HR. No manager. Just me. That's when I understood. This wasn't being buried. It was being exposed. The second meeting was smaller. No glass walls. No visibility. Just a closed office upstairs, the kind most people on my floor never even see from the inside. The CEO sat across from me. Legal was there. Compliance too. No one smiled. Walk me through it, he said. Not the summary. Not the highlights. Everything. So I did. Every discrepancy. Every timestamp. Every pattern that didn't make sense until it did. I expected interruptions. I got silence. The kind that means people are recalculating something in real time. When I finished, legal leaned forward slightly. This isn't negligence, she said. This is structured. Structured. A system. Not a mistake. The CEO nodded once, then looked at me, not past me, not through me. At me. You flagged this internally first? Yes. And we're told to drop it? Yes. A pause. Then, calmly, good. I blinked. Good. You followed process, he said. And then you escalated when it failed. 3 hours earlier, I was a problem. Now I was proof. And proof doesn't get ignored. By midday, the building felt like it was holding its breath. No announcements. No emails. But people knew. You could see it in the way conversations stopped when certain names came up. In the way screens were angled just a little more carefully. In the way no one said language out loud anymore. I stayed at my desk, doing exactly what I'd been told, nothing. Waiting. At 11:27 a.m., my inbox pinged again. Another meeting. Same sender. Different subject line, immediate, executive review. Location, boardroom. Not a conference room. Not a side office. The boardroom. I walked in and stopped just inside the door. 5 people were already seated. All senior leadership. The CEO looked up first. Have a seat. No introduction. No explanation. Just a chair at the table. My chair. As I sat down, I realized something that made my hands go still. No one in that room was questioning whether I belonged there. Because whatever I had uncovered had already made the decision for them. The boardroom didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like containment. No one spoke for the first 30 seconds after I sat down. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already started moving. The CEO slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of my report, annotated with new markings I hadn't seen before. Legal has verified your findings, he said finally. Verified. Not reviewed. Not considered. Verified. One of the board members exhaled slowly, like they were accepting something expensive. Do we know how deep this goes? Someone asked. The CEO didn't look at them when he answered. He looked at me. Deeper than language, he said. That's when the room changed. Because now it wasn't just about one account. It was about exposure. About reach. About how far the structure had been allowed to spread without resistance. My manager's name wasn't mentioned. HR's wasn't either. But I felt them both in the silence anyway. Because silence, in a room like that, isn't absence. It's a decision that something, or someone, is already gone. The first real break in the silence wasn't inside the boardroom. It was outside it. A sharp knock. Then another. A pause. And the door opened before anyone answered. HR. But not the confident version of HR I had seen hours earlier. This version looked off balance. Like she had been walking fast for too long and only just realized she didn't know where she was going. Behind her stood my direct manager. Except he wasn't standing straight anymore. And beside them, legal security. No one invited them in. The CEO didn't move. Neither did anyone else. HR tried to speak first. There seems to be. Sit down, the CEO said calmly. Not loud. Not angry. Final. She stopped mid-step. My manager looked at me. Actually looked at me. For the first time since this started. Not as someone beneath him, but as the reason he was standing there at all. The CEO opened a new file on the table. I think, he said evenly, you should both explain why this issue was handled internally as a personnel problem. He tapped my report. Instead of what it clearly is. And suddenly, the room wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. HR tried again. This time softer. Careful. We were managing an internal escalation, she said, glancing between the executives like she was trying to find an ally in the room. The CEO didn't react. He just turned one page in my report. Internal escalation, he repeated. Quietly. My manager finally spoke, voice tight. She bypassed protocol. That word again. Protocol. Like it mattered more than truth. The CEO finally looked at him. For what? He asked. Silence. Not because there was no answer. Because any answer would be wrong. HR adjusted her posture, forcing composure back into her voice. We believed it was a misunderstanding of scope. I almost laughed. Believed. They hadn't investigated. They hadn't verified. They had managed. Managed me. Managed the problem until it stopped being visible. The CEO closed the file. No, he said simply. One word. That was all it took. Because in that moment, HR realized something she hadn't accounted for. This wasn't being reviewed anymore. It was being judged. And she was no longer the one doing the judging. The CEO leaned back slightly, folding his hands on the table. For the first time since I'd met him, his voice wasn't procedural. It was final. Let's be clear about what happened, he said. No one interrupted. Not HR. Not my manager. Not even legal. You received a flagged report, he continued, sliding my email copy forward. You minimized it. You redirected it to HR. And HR reframed it as a behavioral issue. He looked at HR directly now. Correct? Her mouth opened, then closed again. That hesitation said more than any answer could. The CEO continued, calm but precise. Meanwhile, what she identified is now confirmed as systemic financial misstatement. The word systemic landed heavy in the room. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A structure. He turned to my manager. And you told her to drop it. My manager swallowed. I was protecting team stability. A pause. Then the CEO stood. That small movement changed everything in the room. Because everyone understood it at the same time. This wasn't a discussion anymore. It was the moment the organization decided who it had been protecting. And who it had been sacrificing. HR tried one last time. Not with authority now, just urgency. This is being escalated too quickly, she said. We should contain this internally before. Contain? The CEO interrupted. The word wasn't loud. But it cut clean through her sentence. He tapped the table once. Do you understand what she flagged? He asked. No one answered. Because the truth was starting to settle in, and it didn't fit the story they had built. The CEO turned a page in my report again, slower this time. This isn't a single account issue, he said. This is pattern manipulation across reporting layers. That phrase changed the air in the room. Even HR stopped moving. My manager finally spoke again, but his voice was weaker now. We didn't have full visibility. The CEO looked at him. You did, he said. You chose not to act on it. Silence. A long one. The kind that doesn't wait to be filled. And in that silence, something became obvious to everyone at the table. They hadn't just missed a problem. They had participated in ignoring it. And now there was no version of events where that didn't matter. The room stopped feeling like a boardroom after that. It felt like a record being played out in real time. The CEO didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. Every sentence now was structured like a conclusion, not a discussion. Internal review is no longer sufficient, he said, closing my file. That was the first real shift. HR blinked. What does that mean? The CEO looked at her for a long moment. Then he said it plainly. It means this is no longer yours to manage. No one moved. No one spoke. Even my manager looked like he had finally understood something he had been avoiding all day. The CEO continued, compliance is taking over full investigation. External auditors will be engaged immediately. And access will be suspended where necessary. Suspended. Not adjusted. Not reviewed. Suspended. That word spread through the room like cold air. HR's confidence finally broke, not dramatically, just enough to show she didn't have control of the situation anymore. She glanced at me briefly. For the first time, it didn't feel like she was evaluating me. It felt like she was realizing she had misjudged what I was capable of triggering. By the time I left the boardroom, the building felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, but because everything had changed structurally. People looked at me differently in the hallway. Not openly. Not directly. But in those quick, careful glances people use when they're trying to understand how close they were to something without realizing it. HR didn't stop me again. My manager didn't either. In fact, I didn't see either of them after that meeting. At my desk, my inbox was already shifting, new labels, new access, new permissions I hadn't had before. But I didn't open them right away. I just sat for a moment. Because something strange had settled in me. Not adrenaline. Not victory. Clarity. The CEO's final words replayed in my head, you followed process. And then you escalated when it failed. That wasn't praise. It was recognition. And recognition changes everything. I looked at my screen again. My place in the company hadn't been assigned anymore. It had been revealed. And for the first time since that morning started with HR's sentence. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged anywhere. I already knew where I stood. It came just after 6 p.m. Not from HR. Not from my manager. Not even from legal. From the CEO. A single-line email. Come to my office in the morning. Bring your notes. No subject context. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it longer than I expected to. Because it wasn't an order dressed up as a request. It was an invitation into something that no longer had a visible structure. The office around me was already thinning out, people leaving in quiet clusters, conversations softer than usual, like everyone was afraid to say something that might echo too loudly. I packed my things slowly. For the first time all day, no one stopped me. No corrections. No reminders. No quick word. Just distance. And awareness. As I stepped into the elevator, I realized something simple but heavy. This wasn't over. It had only changed shape. What started as an HR warning had become something the entire company would have to live with. And tomorrow morning, I wasn't going back as the person who sent an email. I was going back as the person who forced it to matter. The next morning didn't feel like a continuation of the day before. It felt like a reset. Same building. Same floor. Same desk. But the atmosphere had shifted in ways no email announcement could explain. People weren't talking the same way. Even the usual noise, keyboards, meetings, laughter, felt muted, controlled. I noticed the small things first. My badge worked in new areas. My access requests were already approved before I submitted them. And HR's office door was closed. Not temporarily. Consistently. At 9 a.m., I walked upstairs. No one stopped me. The CEO's assistant didn't even ask for confirmation before letting me in. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Inside, he was already there. Waiting. No phone. No laptop open. Just a folder on the table and a calm expression that didn't belong to someone reacting anymore. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late," I replied. He nodded once, as if that answer made sense in a way most people's wouldn't. Then he pushed the folder slightly forward. "Before we talk about what happens next," he said, "I want to understand one thing." A pause. "Why didn't you ignore it like everyone else?" The CEO didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The question sat between us like it had been waiting a long time to be spoken out loud. Why didn't you ignore it like everyone else? For a moment, I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was revealing. Because that was the real dividing line in every workplace I had ever been in. The people who absorb problems. And the people who refuse to pretend they don't exist. I looked at the folder on his desk before answering. "I didn't escalate it because I wanted attention," I said. He didn't react. "I escalated it because the process stopped working." That part landed differently. Not emotional. Not defensive. Just factual. I continued, "When HR becomes the ceiling instead of the bridge, you don't have many options left. You either accept the failure, or you expose it." Silence. He studied me for a long time after that. Not like HR did. Not like my manager did. But like someone recalculating something they thought they already understood. Then he leaned back slightly. "That's not how most people in this company think," he said quietly. And I realized that wasn't a criticism. It was the beginning of alignment. The CEO finally opened the folder. Not quickly. Not casually. Like he already knew what was inside, but wanted to confirm the weight of it in real time. HR's notes. My escalation email. The incident report. And then, something I hadn't seen before. A compiled timeline. Every interaction. Every decision point. Every refusal to act. My stomach tightened slightly, not because I was surprised, but because I recognized what this meant. This wasn't just about one conversation anymore. It was about pattern recognition. The CEO tapped the page once. "This," he said, "is where companies usually lose control." I didn't respond. He continued, "Not because of misconduct. Because of delay. Because people assume escalation is failure instead of information." That sentence hung in the air longer than anything else. Then he looked up. HR thought this was about tone. A faint pause. It was never about tone. He closed the folder. And for the first time since I walked into that office, I realized something uncomfortable but clear. I wasn't being evaluated for what I did. I was being evaluated for what I revealed about the system itself. And systems don't like being revealed. The CEO stood up. Not abruptly, carefully, like someone deciding the conversation had moved past the need for seating. He walked to the window and looked out over the city for a moment before speaking again. What HR did, he said, isn't rare. He turned slightly. It's common. That word mattered more than I expected. Common meant repeatable. Common meant tolerated. Common meant predictable. He came back to the table. But what's rare, he continued, is someone documenting the failure instead of absorbing it. That landed heavier than anything before it. Because I understood what he was really saying now. This wasn't about me winning a disagreement. It wasn't even about HR losing authority. It was about visibility. He pushed the folder toward me again, but this time not as evidence. As acknowledgement. You escalated a blind spot, he said. And you did it in a way we can't ignore. A pause. Then the sentence that changed the tone of the entire morning. So now the question is not what HR did. It's what we do with what you showed us. For the first time, I felt the room shift again, not against me this time, but around a decision still forming. The CEO didn't treat the moment like an ending. He treated it like a pivot point. He closed the folder, then said, "We're going to restructure how escalation works across the company." A pause. And I want you involved in building it. Not as a witness. Not as a temporary fix. As part of the redesign. HR entered mid-conversation, composed but slightly off rhythm. I was told escalation review was staying internal, she said. It is, the CEO replied. Without limitation. That was when I saw it, her first real hesitation. Not disagreement. Recognition that the structure she relied on was no longer stable. Close the loop with your team, he added. We're conducting a full review of escalation handling over the last year. HR nodded once, then stepped back and left. The door clicked shut and didn't open again. The CEO leaned forward. This isn't about blame, he said. It's about exposure. We don't fix what we can't see. Then he looked at me directly. You escalated something the system was designed to contain. A pause. And now the system has to change. I understood then that this wasn't about HR anymore. It was about what happens when silence finally stops working inside a place built on it.